Deep in the heart of southern Africa, a mystery of stone rises from the savannah. This is Great Zimbabwe, a silent city whose origins have been debated, dismissed, and rediscovered. For centuries, its very existence challenged the colonial narrative of a continent without history. We are embarking on a journey to uncover the truth of this place. A sprawling metropolis that was once the epicenter of a vast trading empire, a kingdom of wealth and sophistication, whose influence stretched across the Indian Ocean and beyond. Our story begins not with the first stone laid, but with the moment this lost city was found by those who refused to believe. It could be African. Imagine the scene in the late 19th century. European explorers and treasure hunters, hearing whispers of a great stone ruin in the interior, arrive expecting to find the outpost of a distant king, perhaps the Queen of Sheba, or the mines of King Solomon. They could not conceive that such grandeur was the product of indigenous African genius. Yet, as they passed through the imposing outer walls and into the labyrinth of enclosures and passages, the evidence was literally beneath their feet. Every shard of pottery, every bead, every artifact spoke of a complex, homegrown society. The name itself, Zimbabwe, derives from the Shona words Zimba-za-mabwe, meaning houses of stone. This was not a foreign colony. It was the heart of a powerful native civilization. To understand Great Zimbabwe, we must first step back and look at the land that cradled it. The region sits on a high plateau, a landscape of granite hills and fertile valleys. Critically, it was rich in resources: gold from the surrounding rivers and reefs, copper, iron, and abundant ivory from elephant herds. But more than its mineral wealth, it possessed something equally vital: strategic position. This was not a random settlement. It was a deliberate choice, placing the city at the nexus of trade, routes that connected the interior of Africa to the pulsating markets of the Swahili coast, and from there to the wider world of Arabia, Persia, India, and even China. The story of Great Zimbabwe's rise is intimately tied to the movement of people. Around the 11th century AD, Bantu-speaking Shona peoples began to coalesce into larger, more complex chiefdoms in this region. They were skilled pastoralists and agriculturists, but they also possessed a sophisticated knowledge of metallurgy and stone masonry. The transition from wooden palisades to stone architecture was gradual, likely driven by a need for permanence, defense, and a powerful statement of authority. The first structures were modest, but they laid the foundation, both literally and figuratively, for what was to come. The true golden age of Great Zimbabwe, the period of its florescence, began around the 13th century and peaked in the 14th and 15th centuries. This is when the iconic structures we see today were built. The city expanded to cover nearly 1,800 acres, housing an estimated 18,000 inhabitants at its zenith. It was a true urban center, a hive of administrative, religious, and economic activity. The society was hierarchical, ruled by a sacred king known as the Mwenye Mutapa, who wielded both political and spiritual authority. His court was a place of immense ritual and power. At the physical and symbolic center of this power stood the hill complex. Perched on a steep granite kopje, this was the earliest settled area and likely the spiritual and royal nucleus of the kingdom. Its maze of walls and enclosures, built seamlessly into and around the natural boulders, suggests it was a restricted area, perhaps the domain of the king and the priests. From this high vantage point, the rulers could look down upon their entire domain, a constant visual reminder of their presence and authority over the land and its people. But the most breathtaking feature of Great Zimbabwe, and the one that has come to symbolize it, is the Great Enclosure. This massive elliptical structure, with its perimeter wall soaring over 30 feet high and stretching 800 feet long, is the largest ancient structure in sub-Saharan Africa after the Egyptian pyramids. The sheer scale is staggering. The wall is built without mortar, using precisely shaped granite blocks fitted together with masterful skill. Its construction would have required a vast, coordinated labor force, directed by expert architects and engineers. This was not a defensive fortification. It was a statement in stone. Within the great enclosure lies another marvel: the iconic conical tower. This solid stone structure, over 30 feet tall, stands as an enduring enigma. Its purpose has been widely debated. Was it a granary? a symbol of fertility, a phallic emblem of royal power, or a spiritual beacon. It likely served a ritualistic function, its form echoing the shape of the grain bins used by the Shona people, thus symbolizing the prosperity and sustenance the king provided for his people. Walking between the towering outer wall and this mysterious tower, one feels the weight of ceremony and meaning. Surrounding these monumental cores was the Valley Complex, a vast area of dense settlement. Here lived the city's populace, the artisans, traders, farmers, metalworkers, and servants. Archaeologists have uncovered the foundations of numerous daga, clay, and thatch houses clustered together. This was the bustling, vibrant heart of daily life. The air would have been filled with the smells of cooking fires, the sounds of craftsmen at work, and the chatter of a thriving community. It was here that the economic engine of the kingdom hummed. For Great Zimbabwe was, above all else, a city of trade. It was the capital of a commercial empire that controlled the flow of gold from the interior to the coast. Gold was not used as currency within the kingdom, but was its primary export. Rivers were panned and shallow mines were dug to extract the precious metal. This gold, along with ivory, copper, and iron, was transported by porters along established trade routes to coastal city-states like Sofala in modern-day Mozambique. At these Swahili ports, a vibrant exchange took place. African gold and ivory were traded for an array of luxury goods from across the Indian Ocean. Chinese, Celadon porcelain, Persian faience bowls, Indian glass beads, and Arab coins have all been found in the ruins of Great Zimbabwe. These were not common items. They were prestige goods, likely used by the elite to display their wealth and their connection to a wider, sophisticated world. A single shard of Ming Dynasty pottery tells a story of global reach. The social and political structure that enabled this vast enterprise was complex. The Mwenye Mutapa, or Great Lord, was considered semi-divine, an intermediary between the living and the ancestral spirits. His health and rituals were directly tied to the fertility of the land and the prosperity of the kingdom. Succession was matrilineal, passing through the king's sister's line, which created a stable, though often contested, system of royal lineage. A council of elders and regional governors helped administer the far-flung territories of the state. Religion permeated every aspect of life at Great Zimbabwe. The Shona belief system, centered on ancestor worship, Vadzimu, and a supreme creator god, Mwari, was intricately linked to kingship. The hill complex is believed to have been a major religious site. The numerous soapstone bird carvings found there, now the national emblem of Zimbabwe, are thought to represent spiritual messengers or totems of different royal lineages, watching over the kingdom from atop monoliths. Rituals to ensure rain, good harvests, and success in trade would have been conducted here. The engineering and architectural prowess of Great Zimbabwe's builders cannot be overstated. Working with locally quarried granite, they developed a unique and stable building style. They would heat the stone with fire, then cool it rapidly with water, causing it to split into manageable slabs. These were then meticulously shaped and stacked in courses. The walls are curved, not straight, and taper inward as they rise, giving them remarkable stability. The famous chevron and herringbone patterns decorating. Some walls are not merely aesthetic. They also serve as structural reinforcement, directing the flow of rainwater and adding strength. Life for the ordinary citizen, while under the shadow of the elite, was likely one of relative security and participation in a prosperous economy. People farmed sorghum and millet, herded cattle, a major symbol of wealth, and practiced various crafts. Women were pivotal in agriculture and pottery, while men dominated metallurgy, hunting, and construction. The abundance of spindle whorls indicates a robust textile industry. The wealth generated from trade trickled down, allowing for specialization and a high degree of social organization. However, no civilization lasts forever. By the mid-15th century, the power of Great Zimbabwe began to wane. The reasons were likely multifaceted and complex, not the result of a single cataclysm. Environmental factors are strongly suspected. Centuries of supporting a large population may have led to deforestation and soil exhaustion. A series of severe droughts, suggested by climate data, would have crippled agriculture and undermined the king's spiritual authority to ensure rain. The very land that gave it life may have turned against it. Political and economic shifts also played a role. As the central power weakened, subordinate chiefs may have broken away to form their own polities. Furthermore, the direct trade routes to the coast might have been disrupted or bypassed. New goldfields further north could have drawn trade and power away from the Zimbabwe plateau. The kingdom did not suddenly collapse. It slowly fragmented. The Mwenya Mutapa and his court likely migrated north, establishing a new state in the Zambezi Valley, which became known as the Mutapa Empire, a successor that carried on the cultural and political traditions, but never replicated the stone grandeur of its progenitor. By the time Portuguese traders arrived on the coast in the 16th century, Great Zimbabwe was already abandoned. A ghost city known only through legends, the Portuguese heard tales of a fabulously rich stone kingdom in the interior, which they associated with the biblical Ophir. But they never truly found it, and the city was left to the elements for centuries. Its memory was kept alive in Shona oral tradition, but to the outside world it faded into myth. The modern rediscovery of Great Zimbabwe is a story entangled with colonialism and racism. In the late 19th century, figures like German geologist Karl Mauch stumbled upon the ruins. Confronted with architecture that defied his prejudices, Mauch concluded it must have been built by a lost white civilization, linking it fantastically to the Queen of Sheba. This theory, though baseless, became entrenched in colonial ideology, used to justify white settlement by claiming a prior civilized presence. The subsequent period was one of looting and destruction. Treasure hunters, convinced the site held the gold of King Solomon, ransacked the ruins. They dynamited walls, dug indiscriminate pits, and carried away countless artifacts, irreparably damaging the archaeological record. The famous soapstone birds were taken, one ending up in the hands of Cecil Rhodes, the arch-colonialist. This plunder was both a physical and a cultural theft, an attempt to sever the site from its African creators. Serious, systematic archaeology only began in the early 20th century. Pioneering archaeologists like David Randall McIver and, later, Gertrude Caton Thompson conducted rigorous excavations. Their conclusions, published in the 1900s and 1930s respectively, were unequivocal. The pottery, the building methods, the stratigraphy, all evidence pointed to a medieval African origin. Caton Thompson famously wrote, "The ruins are the product of an indigenous civilization of Negro origin." This scientific assertion was a direct challenge to the racist narratives of the time. In the latter half of the 20th century, Great Zimbabwe became a potent symbol in the struggle for liberation. For the emerging black nationalist movements in Rhodesia, the British colony named after the ruins, the site was irrefutable proof of a glorious African past, a testament to the capability and sophistication of their ancestors. It fueled the political demand for self-rule. The country, upon gaining independence in 1980, took its name from the ruins, Zimbabwe. The stone birds were repatriated and placed on the new nation's flag and currency. Today, Great Zimbabwe is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized as a cultural treasure for all humanity. It is a place of pilgrimage, education, and national pride. Conservation efforts are ongoing to preserve the fragile stonework. From the ravages of weather, vegetation, and tourism, modern archaeological techniques, including ground-penetrating radar and isotopic analysis, continue to reveal new secrets, telling us more about the diet, movement, and daily lives of its inhabitants. The legacy of Great Zimbabwe extends far beyond its walls. Its architectural style, the dry stone walling, the curved forms, influenced later centers like Kami and Danangombe. The political and cultural traditions of the Mwenya Mutapa state shaped the history of the entire Zambezi region for centuries. The site stands as a powerful corrective to the outdated and prejudiced view of pre-colonial Africa as a continent without history. It was a hub in a dynamic, interconnected medieval world. What can the silent stones teach us? They speak of human ingenuity, of the ability to organize and build in harmony with the environment. They tell a story of economic acumen, of a society that leveraged its natural resources to engage in global networks. They whisper of spiritual beliefs that anchored a community to its land and its ancestors, and they roar a defiant truth against those who would deny the depth and brilliance of African history. The mystery of Great Zimbabwe is not really who built it. We know it was the ancestors of the Shona people. The deeper mysteries lie in the details, the precise meaning of the symbols, the nuances of its social order, the full orchestration of its trade networks, and the intimate stories of the thousands who called it home. Each new archaeological season has the potential to turn a whisper from the past into a clear voice. As the sun sets over the great enclosure, casting long shadows from the conical tower, one feels the profound presence of history. This is not a dead ruin. It is a place where the past is palpable. The wind through the granite passages seems to carry echoes, the chipping of stone masons, the lowing of royal cattle, the chatter of traders comparing goods from distant lands. Great Zimbabwe is a testament to a lost golden age, a city that mastered its world and left behind a legacy written not on paper, but in stone, a permanent challenge to forgetfulness and prejudice. Our journey ends where it began, contemplating the scale of human achievement. From its humble beginnings on a granite hill to its apex as a metropolis commanding continental trade, Great Zimbabwe's story is one of rise, resilience, and ultimately, transformation. It did not truly vanish. It evolved, its spirit migrating into new political forms and living on in the identity of a modern nation. The lost city of gold was never just about the precious metal. Its real gold was the cultural, political, and architectural genius of its people. The legacy of Great Zimbabwe, however, does not reside solely in its grand walls and towers. To truly grasp its significance, we must venture into the wider landscape it commanded, the network of smaller settlements and tributary states that fed its power. Beyond the capital, a constellation of provincial centers, hilltop fortresses, and trading posts formed the nervous system of the kingdom. Places like Chumnungwa, Nalatale, and Manyakani, though smaller, replicated the stone-building traditions and administrative functions, acting as local hubs for tax collection, craft production, and the mobilization of resources. They were the capillaries that drew wealth in grain, cattle, and especially gold toward the beating heart on the Zimbabwe plateau. This gold was the lifeblood of the state, and its extraction was a sophisticated operation. Contrary to romantic notions of vast underground mines, the gold was primarily alluvial, panned from the sands of rivers like the Mazau and the Save. Miners also followed. Quartz reefs, digging narrow, shallow shafts deep into the earth, using fire to fracture the rock and bone tools to extract the ore. The process was perilous and labor-intensive. The gold dust and nuggets were then consolidated, likely by royal overseers, into standardized weights for transport. This system turned the landscape itself into a source of fluid, portable wealth connecting remote riverbeds to global markets. The journey of this gold to the coast is a saga of human endurance. Caravans of porters, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, would traverse a well-established network of paths across nearly 300 miles of challenging terrain. They carried tusks of ivory, cakes of copper and iron, and leather bags heavy with gold dust. These traders were not just merchants. They were diplomats and cultural intermediaries, navigating the territories of allied and subordinate chiefs under the protection of the Mwenya Mutapa's authority. Their safe passage was a testament to the political order the kingdom imposed across a vast region. Upon reaching the Swahili coast, the caravans entered a different world, the cosmopolitan, mercantile city-states of the Indian Ocean. At ports like Sofala, Kilwa, and Mombasa, the interior's raw met the ocean's refined. Arab, Persian, and Indian dhows lined the harbors, their sails billowing, with the seasonal monsoon winds that dictated the rhythm of transoceanic trade. Here, the gold of Zimbabwe was weighed and traded for an astonishing array of goods that would make the return journey inland, transforming material life and social status in the capital. The imports that flowed back to Great Zimbabwe were carefully curated for their symbolic power. Chinese celadon bowls and Ming porcelain were not mere dishes. They were prestigious items. Displayed in elite contexts or used in important rituals, their pale jade-green glaze, a rarity that spoke of unimaginable distance and connections. Persian faience, with its intricate cobalt blue designs, brought the artistic motifs of the Islamic world into the African interior. Cloth, particularly fine cottons and silks from India, became a medium of elite fashion and political gift-giving. Perhaps most telling are the countless glass beads found in archaeological digs at the site. To the untrained eye, they are simple trinkets. But chemical analysis reveals their origins, some from India, others from the Middle East, even some from as far as Southeast Asia. These beads were a form of currency and a marker of identity. Different colors, sizes, and styles denoted status, age, or clan affiliation. They were woven into clothing, worn as jewelry, and even used in burial practices. The global economy was literally sewn into the fabric of daily life. This exchange was not merely economic. It was also an exchange of ideas. While there is no evidence of direct religious conversion, Islamic influences subtly permeated the elite sphere. Some Arabic coins have been found, not for circulation, but perhaps as curios or raw material for jewelry. Knowledge of astronomy, crucial for navigation and linked to the monsoon cycles, may have filtered inland. New styles of dress, architectural concepts, like the use of coral in coastal Zimbabwean sites, and even culinary spices integrated into a distinctly African cultural matrix, creating a sophisticated hybridity. The spiritual world of Great Zimbabwe was the bedrock that made this commercial empire possible. The king's authority was not just political, it was cosmological. As the primary interlocutor with the ancestral spirits, the Mwenya Mutapa was responsible for ensuring the rains fell. The crops grew and the land remained fertile. Rituals performed in the secluded enclosures of the hill complex were matters of state security. A prolonged drought was not just an environmental crisis. It was a sign of spiritual disfavor that could undermine the king's legitimacy and destabilize the entire kingdom. This is where the famous soapstone birds find their deepest meaning. These sculptures, with their human-like features and lips, standing atop carved monoliths, are utterly unique. Most scholars agree they represent Shiri, or totemic spirit messengers, likely associated with specific royal clans. They may symbolize the connection between the sky, the land, and the ancestors, the eagle's vantage point overseeing and protecting the kingdom. Their placement was deliberate, watching over sacred and royal spaces, a constant stone embodiment of the spiritual forces that sanctioned and sustained earthly power. The decline of Great Zimbabwe was a slow unraveling, a complex interplay of environmental push and political pull. Tree ring and sediment core data from the region indicate a series of severe droughts in the 15th century. For a society dependent on rainfall for agriculture and for the king's spiritual credibility, this was catastrophic. The land could no longer support the dense urban population. Famine, disease, and social unrest would have followed, weakening the central authority. Simultaneously, the economic foundations began to shift. As the kingdom's control weakened, regional governors and outlying chiefs, no longer feeling the pull of the center, could have begun to trade directly with the coast, siphoning off wealth. Furthermore, new and richer gold fields were discovered further north, in the Mazau Valley and beyond. Trade routes naturally migrated toward these new sources of wealth. The Mwenya Mutapa, facing ecological and economic pressure at home, likely made a strategic decision to follow the wealth and the political future, moving his court north to re-establish control over the revitalized trade networks. This migration marked not an end, but a transformation. The Mutapa Empire that arose in the 15th and 16th centuries was the direct successor of Great Zimbabwe. It carried forward the royal lineage, the religious traditions, and the commercial acumen. However, it did not rebuild in stone on the same monumental scale. The new capitals were built with wood and clay, reflecting a different environment and perhaps a shift in priorities toward mobility and rapid consolidation of power in a new territory. The golden age of stone had passed, but the legacy of the state endured. The Portuguese, arriving in the late 15th century, encountered this successor state, the Mutapa Empire, and became deeply entangled in its politics, often through conflict and uneasy alliance. They wrote extensive records, desperate to locate the source of the gold. They heard legends of the original stone city, which they called Zimbabwe, but they conflated it with their search for the mythical Christian kingdom of Prester, John. Their documents, though biased, provide invaluable external glimpses into the region in the centuries after. Great Zimbabwe's abandonment, the colonial appropriation of the ruins in the late 19th and early 20th centuries represents one of the most damaging chapters in its history. Cecil Rhodes' British South Africa Company literally occupied the site, using it as a base. The racist dogma of the time, which could not accept black African authorship, led to the active suppression of archaeological evidence. When guidebooks were printed for early tourists, they perpetuated the fiction of Phoenician or Arab builders. This was not just ignorance. It was an ideological tool to justify white minority rule by erasing a monumental African achievement, the fight to reclaim. Great Zimbabwe's narrative was therefore an intellectual and political battle. African archaeologists, historians, and nationalists like Professor Thomas Huffman later provided definitive interpretations of the site's layout as a reflection of Shona, cosmology, and social structure. Their work, building on earlier pioneers like Caton Thompson, armed the liberation movements with a powerful symbol. The ruins became a rallying point, proof that Zimbabweans had a glorious history of self-governance and sophistication long before colonial occupation. In the modern era, Great Zimbabwe faces new challenges. As a World Heritage Site and a source of national pride, it draws thousands of visitors. Managing tourism to prevent physical damage while educating the public is a constant balance. Conservationists battle invasive vegetation whose roots can dislodge ancient stones, and they monitor the effects of climate change on the fragile ruins. Meanwhile, archaeologists continue to use non-invasive technologies like LiDAR to map the full extent of the settlement, revealing hidden structures and reshaping our understanding of the city's density and layout. The story of Great Zimbabwe is ultimately a human story. It is the story of planners who envisioned a city in harmony with granite hills, of laborers who shaped millions of stones with patient skill, of traders who walked thousands of miles to connect continents, of priests who sought to commune with the unseen, and of a king who wielded both a scepter and a spiritual responsibility. It is a story of ambition, adaptation, and resilience. When we stand in the shade of the great enclosure today, we are not just looking at a relic. We are witnessing a testament to the universality of human aspiration, to build, to organize, to create meaning, to trade, and to connect. The lost city of gold was never lost to the people whose heritage it is. It was only lost to a world that refused to see it. Now its stones speak clearly, breaking a centuries-long silence to tell a profound truth about African history and its rightful, formidable place in the story of human civilization. The journey of discovery is far from over. With every passing season, the Earth yields new clues, ensuring that the conversation between the present and this magnificent past continues, inviting us all to listen and to learn. The profound silence that now envelops the stone ruins of Great Zimbabwe is perhaps its most eloquent feature. It is a silence that invites contemplation, urging us to imagine the symphony of life that once filled this space, the rhythmic chipping of stone against stone, the lowing of vast royal herds, the murmur of courtly debate, the incantations of spirit mediums, and the distant songs of porters returning from the coast. To move beyond the monumental core and into the intellectual legacy of this place is to begin to hear echoes of that symphony, to understand how Great Zimbabwe has shaped not just history, but historiography itself, forcing a radical rethinking of Africa's past. The very discipline of African archaeology was, in many ways, forged in the crucible of the debates surrounding Great Zimbabwe. For decades, the site was a battleground of ideas, not just of trowels and brushes. The external origin theories, propounded by figures like Karl Peters and eagerly adopted by colonial regimes, were not born of mere academic error, but of a deliberate ideological need to justify conquest and settlement. If such grandeur could not be African, then the land was ostensibly empty of significant achievement, ripe for takeover. Therefore, every artifact uncovered, every wall mapped, became a piece of evidence in a high-stakes argument about human capability and civilizational ownership. The meticulous work of archaeologists like Gertrude Caton Thompson in the 1930s was therefore revolutionary. By employing rigorous stratigraphic methods, she demonstrated that the material culture within the ruins, the pottery, the tools, the everyday objects was in unbroken sequence with the artifacts of the contemporary Shona people living nearby. There was no layer of foreign material. Her conclusion was a seismic rebuttal to racism masquerading as scholarship. It shifted the paradigm, but the fight was far from over. Proving the builders were African was one step. The next, even more complex step was to understand the mind of the builders, to interpret the meaning woven into the very fabric of the city. This led to the pioneering ethno-archaeological work of scholars from the late 20th century onward. Researchers like Thomas Huffman spent years integrating archaeological data with Shona, ethnography, oral tradition, and the study of symbolic systems. They asked, how do the Shona conceive of space, of hierarchy, of the sacred? This approach yielded transformative insights. The layout of Great Zimbabwe ceased to be merely a collection of impressive buildings and became a symbolic landscape, a stone map of cosmology and power. From this perspective, the spatial organization of the city reveals a profound symbolic logic. The hill complex, isolated and elevated, is interpreted as the domain of the sacred, the place of the ancestors and of the king in his ritual role, the male sphere associated with rainmaking and remote authority. The great enclosure below, with its higher walls and iconic tower, is seen as the domain of the secular royal court, the seat of political administration and perhaps the residence of the king's senior wives, a female sphere, associated with fertility, sustenance, and the day-to-day governance of the kingdom. The valley settlements, then, represent the body politic, the commoners. This tripartite structure mirrors the Shona worldview, placing the city in a constant state of ritual balance and cosmic order. The famous conical tower, within this framework, is far more than an architectural folly. Its solid grain bin shape is a potent symbol of the kingdom's wealth and the king's primary duty, to ensure the granaries of his people were full. It was not a functional silo, but a symbolic one, a permanent stone invocation of prosperity and abundance. Similarly, the parallel passage within the great enclosure, a narrow, walled channel, might have been a processional way, used for rituals that reenacted the centrality of the king and his role in the agricultural cycle. Every curve of a wall, every strategic opening toward a sacred hill or a setting sun, likely held meaning. This sophisticated understanding extends to the kingdom's economy, which was far more nuanced than a simple extraction and export model. Yes, gold was paramount for foreign trade, but the internal economy rested on a different foundation: cattle. In Shona society, cattle represented wealth, social bonds, through lobola, or bride price, and spiritual capital. They were the ultimate store of value. The king's authority was sustained not only by his control of gold trade, but by his management of vast herds, which were distributed to loyal subordinates, cementing political alliances and creating a network of obligation and patronage that held the state together. The economy was, in essence, a blend of the symbolic and the material, where spiritual credit and social debt were as tangible as any coin. The reach of this influence, the Zimbabwe culture, extended across a vast swath of southern Africa. After the decline of the capital, the architectural and political template migrated. At Kami, near Bulawayo, a new style emerged, characterized by elaborate checkered and herringbone-patterned walls on terraced hillsides. At Danangombe, Dlodlo, and Naletale, the decorative stonework became even more intricate. These were not mere copies. They were regional adaptations, successor states that carried forward the core principles of sacred kingship, stone-building prestige, and control of trade, each creating its own localized center of power in the wake of Great Zimbabwe's decentralization. The Portuguese records of the 16th and 17th centuries, while frustratingly self-interested and often violent, provide a fractured mirror in which we can see the reflected image of this legacy. Their chronicles describe the court of the Mutapa, with its elaborate etiquette, its powerful officials, and its control over the gold fairs. They recount wars, conversions, and betrayals, all set against the backdrop of a complex African polity that the Europeans struggled to dominate or comprehend. These documents, read against the grain, helped to animate the political world that Great Zimbabwe had birthed, a world that continued to evolve long after. The original capital was left to the elements. In the modern era, the conservation of Great Zimbabwe is a science and an art of immense sensitivity. The dry stone walls are vulnerable. A single dislodged capstone can allow rainwater to penetrate the core, leading to collapse, Conservationists practice minimal intervention, using original materials and techniques to repair only where necessary. They battle fig trees and other vegetation whose roots are powerful enough to topple centuries-old masonry. Every decision is guided by the principle of preserving not just the physical fabric, but the authenticity and spirit of the place. It is a constant dialogue with the past, a commitment to stewardship for future generations. Today, the site is also a living cultural landscape. For the Shona people, it is not a relic, but a sacred space, a place to connect with ancestors. Spirit mediums still come to perform ceremonies, and local communities feel a deep, ongoing connection to the ruins. This presents a beautiful but sometimes challenging intersection of heritage management, tourism, and active religious practice, balancing the needs of pilgrims, the curiosity of international visitors, and the imperative of preservation is an ongoing negotiation, ensuring Great Zimbabwe remains not a museum of the dead, but a relevant part of a living culture. The global significance of Great Zimbabwe continues to grow. It stands as one of the most powerful case studies in the decolonization of history. It taught the world that civilizations are not monopolized by any one continent or people. Its story dismantles the simplistic division of history into civilized and uncivilized. Here was a society that, without a written script in the traditional sense, recorded its history, laws, and beliefs in landscape, architecture, and oral poetry with a complexity that rivals any parchment. Furthermore, it forces us to expand our definition of world systems. Long before the European age of exploration, the Indian Ocean was a vibrant crossroads of exchange, linking East Africa to the Middle East, India, and Southeast Asia. Great Zimbabwe was a crucial inland terminus of this system. A bead from Gujarat, a shard of porcelain from Jingdezhen, and a coin from Kilwa found in its soil are not isolated curiosities. They are proof of an early globalized economy in which Africa was not a passive recipient, but an active, influential participant and producer. The unanswered questions still beckon. What was the precise nature of the king's daily life within the hill complex? Can linguistic analysis of pottery motifs or settlement patterns tell us more about the different clans that made up the city's populace? What more can isotopic analysis of skeletal remains reveal about the diet and migration of individuals? Could there be undiscovered royal burials, and if so, what would they tell us about the rituals of succession and the afterlife? Each new technological tool offers a chance to listen more closely to the whispers from the past. Ultimately, the journey to Great Zimbabwe is a journey into the heart of human creativity. It is a story of a people who looked at a landscape of granite copias and saw not an obstacle, but an opportunity for sublime architecture, who leveraged their environmental resources not for mere survival, but to engage with a wider world, who constructed a political and spiritual system of remarkable resilience and sophistication. The lost city was never truly lost. It was waiting patiently for the world to develop the humility and the tools to understand it. As the stars emerge over the silent ruins, one is left with a profound sense of connection. The same moon that shone on the Mwenye Mutapa presiding over a court lit by firelight shines down on the visitor today. The same wind that filled the sails of dhows carrying Zimbabwean gold to distant ports rustles through the grass growing between the ancient stones. Great Zimbabwe endures not as a mystery to be solved, but as a testament to be honored, a powerful, permanent reminder that human history is a rich tapestry, woven from countless threads in every corner of our world. Its legacy is a gift, the gift of perspective, the gift of respect, and the enduring inspiration that comes from standing in the presence of true, timeless greatness. Finally, we stand at the threshold of understanding. The story of Great Zimbabwe is not a closed book, but an ongoing conversation, a dialogue between stone and soil, between past and present, between memory and discovery. Our journey through its history, from its rise as a powerhouse of innovation and trade, to its enduring legacy as a symbol of identity and resilience, reveals a narrative far richer than any single documentary could contain. It is a narrative that compels us to look at the African continent, and indeed at human history itself, with renewed wonder and respect. The stones of Great Zimbabwe do not boast, they simply endure. In their silent, imposing presence, they ask us to reconsider what we know about power, about wealth, and about civilization. They challenged the outdated maps that placed Africa on the periphery of the medieval world, redrawing it firmly at the center of a vast economic and cultural network. The gold that flowed from its rivers was more than a commodity. It was a catalyst for connections that spanned oceans, weaving southern Africa into the intricate fabric of global history. But the true treasure of Great Zimbabwe was never the metal buried in its earth. The true treasure is the intellectual achievement it represents. The visionary urban planning, the engineering mastery of dry stone architecture, the sophisticated socio-political system that balanced sacred kingship with complex trade logistics, and the spiritual worldview that infused every aspect of life with meaning. This is the indelible legacy left by the Shona ancestors, a legacy written in a language of granite and gravity that time has failed to erase. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the great walls in hues of amber and shadow, the city seems to breathe with the memories of centuries. The lessons here are timeless. They speak of human adaptability in the face of environmental change, of the fragility of even the greatest powers, and of the enduring strength of cultural identity. Great Zimbabwe teaches us that civilizations are not defined by their permanence, but by their impact, by the ideas they seed and the identities they forge. Today, the site stands as a beacon. It is a beacon for archaeologists who continue to decode its secrets, for a nation that draws profound pride from its heritage, and for all of us who seek a more complete and honest understanding of our shared human story. It reminds us that history is not a single story told by the victors, but a multitude of stories waiting to be heard from the very stones beneath our feet. So we conclude not with an ending, but with an acknowledgement. The lost city is found. Its voice, once silenced by neglect and misinterpretation, now rings clear across the valleys. It tells a story of ingenuity, of connection, and of majestic achievement. Great Zimbabwe is no longer a mystery to the world, but a monument to it, a permanent testament to the boundless capacity of the human spirit to build, to believe, and to belong to something greater than oneself. The journey of discovery ends here, but the inspiration, like the stones themselves, lasts forever.